Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk about the Latin third person possessive, or how we show possession using the third person. So let's get into this. First of all, when we think about the third person possessive, it's helpful to think about what this is in English. In English, this is words like her, his, its, and their. Of course, it's important to remember that in English, the number and gender is always going to be determined by the antecedent. So the her, the his, the its, the their, whatever it's referring back to determines whether it's singular, plural, and whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. In Latin, this is going to be a bit different. In Latin, there is an adjective and a pronoun that is used. The adjective, suis, sua, suum, is going to have its number and gender not determined by the antecedent. While on the other hand, the pronoun, which can be eius, eorum, or earum, that number and gender will be determined by the antecedent. It's also important to know that the adjective and the pronoun are not interchangeable in Latin. So let's talk a little bit about that possessive adjective suis. Now this is used when the possessor is the subject of the clause, or generally speaking the subject of the sentence, but in a few instances it could be a separate subject, but it will be the subject of the clause. And this is because suis is what is considered a reflexive adjective, meaning that it refers back to the subject. Again, this is an adjective, and so it will do adjective-like things, meaning that it's going to use the same case, number, and gender as the object which is being possessed. This also will help us remember that the gender of the word suis will not determine whether it means his, her, or its, or their, but rather the antecedent will still determine that in English. So we will have to think about the subject of the clause and whether that was masculine, feminine, or neuter, and whether it was singular and plural. And so these forms in Latin, and they're going to follow first and second declension forms, we'll see that the singular forms here are very close to those that we would expect for first and second declension patterns. When we deal with these, even though all of these are singular, they are singular because the word that is being possessed is singular. So all of these can be translated his, her, its, and their, even if it doesn't necessarily have the same gender or number as the word it's referring back to, the antecedent. Likewise, we see the plural forms having those normal first and second declension patterns that we would be expecting to see here. And once again, even though these are plural, they can have singular translations in English with his, her, and its. So always think about the fact that it's the subject of the clause that's going to determine how you translate this, not the gender or number. That is going to be dependent upon the word that's being possessed. The other word that we use is the possessive pronoun. Now, generally, I'm going to refer to this as a use, but it's important to know that it's not just a use. Now, this is used when the possessor is not the subject of the clause. This is used when it's going to be referring to something else. And it is a pronoun. It's specifically going to be the pronoun is, ai, id, which we've previously talked about, and which you might recall has a few different genitive forms. Now, the number and the gender is always going to be the same as the antecedent. So here, his, her, its is going to be determined by the gender of this word, and whether it's their, his, her, or its, whether it's singular or plural, is also going to be determined by the antecedent. Now, while that is helpful, it's not incredibly helpful if we think about the fact that the case is always going to be genitive. And in the singular, regardless of what gender we're working with, the form is always going to be a use. And so once again, we might see a use, and it can be his, her, or its, depending upon whether the antecedent that it's referring back to is masculine, feminine, or neuter. So once again, it's important to know the antecedent of the word you're working with if you want to determine how to best translate this into English. You can't just simply rely on knowing the gender of this word, since all three genders have the exact same genitive singular form. Now, in the genitive plural, we'll see that there are, of course, different forms that exist. We'll see eorum for both the masculine and the neuter, and earum for the feminine. But here, again, it doesn't really matter when we're translating this because regardless of the gender, these are all plural, and in English, the plural possessive is going to be the word their, T-H-E-I-R, and so it doesn't really matter what the gender is when we're translating it. However, if you're going into Latin, if you're trying to write a Latin sentence, this is when it will matter. You'll have to think about whether it is a feminine possessor or if it's not feminine. So now we've had a chance to look at the possessive adjective and the possessive pronoun. And with that, you should be ready to do some Latin.